Super Saturday, this year, the Six Nations competition of the men comes down to the final game. No matter what, the final game will decide the men's Six Nations, which is the great situation to be in. It's rarely the case. Often we've seen the title won, sometimes even before the last day, but often on that first game of the final weekend, you then have two dead rubbers afterwards, just deciding, sometimes the wooden spoon, but very often just who's finishing where between third and fourth. We have it, no matter what, coming down to the final day, 8 p.m. on Super Saturday. It's a really exciting prospect.
Love to see it, don't we? And France v Scotland is such a good game for that to swing on.
Yeah.
Because historically, Scotland are like the plucky underdogs who love to be like the party wrecker or are glad to be involved, like invited to the final, as it were. Obviously, very up and down with how I'm currently feeling about Scotland and like how they're playing and stuff, which we will come on to. But France, all in all, in order to win the title, have to entertain one more time. And of course, France will deny it, right?
Yeah.
But they will know how much they have to win by. They will know what the task at hand is, whether it's just like get bonus points, get a draw, win by 1, or win by 50.
They'll be told this in advance, right? And it's one of these things. I remember, I'm going to use this as an example purely because I've spoken to people involved from all angles, right? But last season's URC, final day of the season, Toby Booth said when the Ospreys had a very particular set of things they needed, but they knew it would culminate in them needing to get bonus point win if other results went their way, right? Booth said beforehand he wasn't going to tell his players what the other results were, so they would just play the same regardless. But then I've since then interviewed and spoken to, 5 or 6 players that played that day, and all of them said we were watching the games on our phones.
Yeah, they all know.
All sat checking the scores constantly. They were sat around the team room just refreshing constantly. No matter what, they will know. And it was a weird thing last weekend when Blair Murray and Finn Russell genuinely didn't know that France had won in Ireland.
Yeah.
Both of them were genuine. And Murray, Kinghorn had a moment of going, oh, France won, okay. And kind of settling back into that, where Russell said, I didn't know. I get it if it's a very tight turnaround, right? But in this situation, they will be telling France exactly what they need to do.
Yeah.
And the thing is, with the points difference, right, they probably know it's just win the game.
Yeah.
Most likely, unless Ireland put up a hell of a score or England do as well.
Which are both very possible.
But a bonus point win and they win the tournament regardless.
Yeah.
So as you say, they need to go out and entertain once more. And they get to win it on home soil once again, as their 2 previous title wins have come.
They will have been practicing their attack all week. Because they know that the most likely outcome is score 4 tries and we've got this wrapped up.
Yeah.
So all week, what they will have been doing is let's get this attack bang on. Let's get this kicking game bang on. So we are living in their half and we are constantly giving opportunities to our guys out wide.
You say that though, the most interesting point about the end of that game was not any of the players' reaction, was not Galtier.
Of course.
It was Shaun Edwards' reaction, right? And I don't know if people saw this, but we saw post-game Fabien Galtier going around grinning, congratulating all the staff. He goes to Shaun Edwards and he's absolutely fuming. He's absolutely tamping about the fact they let in those 2 tries right at the end.
Yeah.
And he was just fuming. He couldn't take any joy out of the game at all because they right at the death.
That's so typical Shaun Edwards. That's typical Warriors, yeah.
So I think there's a very good chance that they have been just blitzing defence all week. Yeah. And they're going, we're not going to let the Scotland team, who just go wide all the time, get past us.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I don't know how much that Scotland attack will threaten them. Scotland have broadly played at the same level throughout most of this tournament, right? We've discussed this before, but comfortable against Italy, not great against Ireland, did okay against England, obviously could have won the game, and then they beat Wales, but Wales weren't playing well, and then they somehow let Wales back into the game, and I still don't know how I feel about that as a contest.
So hard. We still haven't recorded a video on that because we haven't worked out how we feel about it.
Yeah, but with this one, my instinct with Scotland is like that they just love to pass the ball until it ends up in either Joanne O'Darcy or Kinghorn's hands.
Yeah.
And then something will happen because they are all excellent players, and that is kind of the way it is. And I'm not a test level defence coach, but I can't help but feel like Shaun Edwards will have a contingency plan in place for something like that when they don't have Sione Tuipulotu to drive up the hard yards as the fail-safe.
The big trend of Test rugby so far this year, which is basically the Six Nations, but a little bit Rugby Europe, actually a big part of Rugby Europe. Rugby Europe has been largely the same as this in terms of a trend, right? Is that all defences have got used to, especially at Test level, defending really organised play. everyone's worked out and they've adapted, and most defences are either much more aggressive or less aggressive in order to make up the kind of very island-style system, sort of in the All Blacks run as well, of lots of little passes, of being very interconnected, right? And defence have got so good at covering that now the trend is bullshit. It is getting individual players who have a bit of magic and a bit of stardust into situations where they can do something individualistic. And Scotland, in some ways, were ahead of the trend because they've been playing that way for a very long time. But the problem with Scotland, I think, is they have, I would say, the second most bullshit players of any team in this year's Six Nations.
They've got
to
loads.
France.
They've got
Like,
loads.
France are far and away number one.
Yeah.
Basically, their entire team are bullshit players. Even with the biggest bullshit player of the lot, Dupont gone, they've still got BLBRA and Peno, who are number 2 and 3 on that list, like of the best bullshit
Ramos
players in Europe.
right up there.
Ramos is right up there. Like, Douan, though, is in that conversation. He's probably in the top 5.
Yeah.
Darcy Graham is a bullshit player. Hugh Jones is a bullshit player. Finn Russell is a bullshit player. Like, all of these are here and in the team, right? Scotland
Johnny
probably-
Matthews as well. Oh, mate.
Based on the way the game's been going, Scotland should be more successful than they have been, right?
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that underpins it is you need the system to be working in order for the bullshit to work.
Yeah.
Right? And so what we've seen Scotland do is the final 10%, they've been, basically, Scotland have been doing the icing without ever baking the cake, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
And like the icing is beautiful and wonderful and like the best icing out there, you know. Like only France's icing can compete with what Scotland have got. But they're not baking the cake.
Like, it tastes delicious.
Yeah.
But it's not edible.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah. As I say, I think actually the more this tournament's gone on, the more I've probably realised they probably do need Sione a little bit more than I think, just so they've got
We knew they'd miss him.
the
but
backup plan.
I
It's for a
said this before
different
the
reason.
tournament of like, you know, Stafford McDowell and having Tom Jordan as an option as well. Like, they probably won't miss him that much, but they really have.
Yeah,
They really
like
have.
they've been all right because they've been able to distribute the ball because
Yeah.
like Tom Jordan's a great player and like obviously played very
McDowell's
well
a much
against
more rounded player than
Yeah.
you'll think of it as.
and like he played very very well against Wales, scored a couple of tries. Weirdly, just thinks he's huge, as you
Yeah.
said the other week. Like he's becoming more and more Brexit as the tournament goes on. Tom
Yeah.
Jordan just running into shit. Like I'm here for it, but he's still not got the Tongan blood. You know, he's still not Sione Tuipulotu, who is a genuinely like top end international carrier and a world class distributor. You know,
Pilotu's absence has also made his Lions claims all the much greater. Like,
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, Scotland just don't function without this guy. Where they're world beaters with him. Not world beaters, but they're very, very good with him. And without him, suddenly they drop apart a bit.
it's so difficult because you have games like the Australia one where it's like Scotland do look like world beaters. Like when you look at them at their best, you think, oh yeah, they could beat France easily. But
And
if
they
you
have
look
beaten
at
France.
yeah, exactly.
They've been at their best and they've beaten France. over the
Also,
last
if
few
you
years.
look at how they played against Wales and against Ireland, you'd think like they won't stand a chance in this game.
Yeah.
So I find Scotland really hard to predict.
Yeah.
Like doing a format like this on Scotland is a stitch up because you can only be wrong on it. What you can then change about a bit. Okay, so let's say because Scotland. One thing that's gone really well for them this Six Nations is the aerial game off 9.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Jamie
Okay.
Ritchie as that lead chaser,
Yeah, yeah.
using him in that blindside winger role, I think has been outstanding.
A revelation.
Yeah,
The moment they came
because-
in with that against England, you were like, oh, this has
Yeah.
changed everything.
Because he's tall, he gets so high off the ground with his jump, and he's just very accurate in his
He's
kick
trained
chase.
as a line-out jumper, right?
Yeah.
He's using that mobility to get up in the air.
100%. And behind that, when he slaps it back, if you slap it to Darcy Graham and he has a load of half tacklers in front of him,
Right, he is more likely to make a break than the other way around.
100%. Yeah. And much the same with Johan van der Merwe, and even Blair Kinghorn, actually, who does have a degree of that bullshit factor when it comes to that. And he showed that against Wales, and he was rightfully the man of the match, So I think from a Scotland perspective, right, and obviously I want Scotland to do well in this game.
Yeah.
If they are to frustrate France and take away what they do well, they're going to have to execute that really, really well.
Yeah.
They've got Ben White, I think, has had actually a very good tournament.
Very good,
at
quietly
nine.
very good.
Yeah, I feel like if they lean into that and they do it successfully, then that's going to go really well for them. But the flip side of that is, of course, the French back three. Now, Biel Biarré, he's a world-class player. The weakest part of his game is the aerial game,
Yeah.
right? There was even last week, like just before he did the little funny cross-field thing, that came off the back of him dropping a high ball backwards, from an aerial contest, and Ramos being there to sweep it up. So that is a bit of a
Yeah,
concern. Pinot and Ramos I would be less concerned about because they both do
Pinot's
that
good in the
freakish thing. If you just chuck this ball up in the air for me, where they catch it like that.
Yeah.
They don't just take it into the bread basket. They catch it like with their hands in the air. Pinot, it's very risky, but he gets away with it all the
You
time.
get some, like George North always said this, right? George North said that he found it more comfortable to catch like that with his hands than bring it into the chest.
Some players can just
like
do
that.
it. But yeah, flipping that onto France.
Yeah.
Okay, so Scotland will try and get them on back foot, so they do like funny things like what Ramos and Biel Biarre.
Like Ireland targeted them with.
Yeah. But it's one thing peppering France with these high balls, getting Ramos into erratic situations and so on. But the thing is, half the time, it ends up with them just breaking downfield. And I know they've not got Dupont in the team. Like, that's a very important part of this. But it's something else learning to just actually defend that, actually tackle
I
them.
wonder whether they adapt that much with Dupont out and replaced by Lukaku. Because we saw them last week, right? Come in and use the same structure as a bit around 9 to give Dupont as many options as possible. Lukaku instead used it to up the pace of the game. And it was a very different threat, but it was legitimate. I think it's interesting. And I wonder whether, one, like long term, Dupont is going to look at that and adapt his game around that and add that into his game. Of like, sometimes I'm just picking past the guy next to the rug, right? Because Dupont, I think, over the last 2 years has got so caught up in being a genius that he's always looking for genius plays on.
Yeah.
And they come off 70% of the time, right? And then the other 30% is not a problem because he can bounce out tackles or, you know, someone will take it or he can just pop it up for forward who makes a good carry because everyone's focused on him, right? I wonder whether, we saw this a little bit against the All Blacks last autumn, whether that's going to be interesting from a Dupont point of view. But also, do France now keep the same structures in place and tell Luka to just do that? Play your natural game you play for Bordeaux and just play quick, play sharp, be alert at all times, try and play like yourself rather than doing a Dupont impression, which I think that was part of what happened at the weekend, right? Part of why Luka had one of the best games of his career, certainly from an international perspective, was because he was playing as himself rather than trying to fit a different system.
And he was bringing the best out of Ontomac as well. You know, that France flooded a lot more forwards around Ontomac, and like as the way that they play offline is different because they kind of play like offloads off 9, more so than just like you see what Gibson Park does, where he just fizzes the ball across and there's just like 5 people stood 10 metres away from him. One of them's going to carry the ball. They reverted a bit closer to that, you know.
But they also played more of 10 than normal.
A lot of them off the outside of Ontomac, which just I think opened them up so much, and I think it was so different from what Ireland were expecting to defend. And I expect that they'll go more towards that. But the good thing is they can play off both, you know. Maxime Lukaku is a really good runner with the ball and offloader and a really good game manager. Like, you know, if you sleep on him for a minute, then he will break through. Like, you look at the Boudon try where he runs that support line off France going for the quick Noir ball and him throwing the offload out the back to Boudon.
I will say, you mentioned Maxime Lukaku runs like the running animation in Rugby 22.
He does, doesn't he?
Like, kind of like, there's a particular way he moves his knees. So that's a note. It's covered in that book, by the way.
Yes.
That biography of him. That's going to be interesting, how they adapt, and how much, again, do they focus on just getting the ball out wide and getting into those positions, right? Because you've probably lost that cross kick off 9. There's an option of getting it wide all the time.
Yeah.
Lukaku, obviously, is a very good kicker with the ball, but he's not that player.
He loves to just spank it long and occasionally goes for a contestable as well, which is rare for France.
In theory, that makes them easier to defend, but actually Lukaku will probably play with more pace because he's not weighing up kicks to both wings and into the backfield. like, you know...
You've got Ontomac and Ramos to do that?
Yeah. You can play faster if you're only weighing up, let's say, 30 choices instead of 100, right?
Yeah.
You are going to make your decision out of those faster.
Yeah.
It's human nature. Even though Dupont isn't human, so that doesn't really apply. But that's going to be interesting. The 7-1 bench again is interesting because there was a leaked team a few days ago that had them at 6-2. So it looks like something's changed. They have gone 7-1 with Le Garrec, who can, in theory, play 10 and fullback, but realistically can't. Lukaku, again, can play 10. Do you want him playing there?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's a difficult one because, like with Dupont, it's like you could legit just play him wherever you wanted. So he's a bit of a cheat code with regards to what you do with your bench. But with Lukaku playing 9, suddenly, like, if you put Le Garrec on the wing, he'd be fine. Like, obviously, aerially, he'd be very tested. He's not the tallest, so Jamie Ritchie would be able to rise above him and slap those balls back.
He played some fullback as a teenager, Le Garrec.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know how late on he
Unsurprising. because.
Played, yeah.
But from a skill set perspective, he could do a job in the back three.
Yeah.
Right. The midfield is what concerns me because
Well, Jegu covers. He's the best 15 in the world at the minute. Except
yes,
for
he
Brex.
is. Yes, he is. He was outstanding.
Again, there was talk. Galtier mentioned that he wants Jegu to play some club rugby at centre to get some starts at 13, so he becomes a genuine hybrid player option. He's doing the things without boasting about them that Eddie Jones talked about doing for so long.
Yeah. No, you're right, because
But-
Jegu looked really at home playing 13 last
We
week.
saw what that pack coming off the bench did to Ireland. Imagine what it can do to Scotland. So their pack aren't the physical presence. They're incredibly efficient, Scotland's pack, but they aren't the physically demanding presences that Ireland's are. And that Scottish bench is solid. You know, Johnny Gray's on the bench, which adds a bit of oomph off the bench, but that bench is not... You'd have said before the game that Ireland had the stronger bench, right? But then France had a physically bigger bench and they used it smarter.
Yeah.
That Scottish bench is not of the standard that France is.
No.
And watch them all come on and win the game here, but like...
Sure.
I wonder whether they'll be able to live with France.
And it's much more significant when you've got the 7-1. I know Scotland have gone 6-2 themselves,
Yeah.
but the way that France like to use that is they like to roll them all on at once.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that is a significant part. That's 3 times in the Six Nations they have rolled on a new pack all at once. And every single time they've made an immediate impact.
Yeah.
And how much of that is down to Galtier's timing, I don't know. Maybe he knows, like, he has stats on the opposition that tell him, like, they're starting to tire.
Yeah,
This is the time to roll them on. Like the reverse of Rassi's kind of battle stats, you know? I'm not sure, but it can't be a coincidence that every time he's done it, suddenly they've scored straight away afterwards.
How is your gut feeling about France getting the bonus point they need to win the championship?
I'm really sorry, Scotland fans. I feel confident that they're going to do it.
Yeah.
As in France. Just because they have the kicking game.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of Scotland's kicking game is built around creating 50-50s. And obviously, whilst the 50 is great, the 50 isn't, you know. France essentially need to create 3 opportunities where they break the opposition down in the game, because the other time they just need to give the ball to Louis Bielbiaré, because it is physically, humanly impossible to defend when he puts the ball on his foot and it goes, right? It is physically impossible to defend that. They essentially only need to get into 3 try scoring scenarios, because some moment of bullshit like that will happen at some point in the game.
He
with
could
him and
break
Pinot.
the try-scoring record that has stood for about 100 years of most tries in a 5 Nations or 6 Nations tournament. Been equalised by Jacob Stockdale, but no one's ever broken it. He could do it this weekend.
Age 21.
He's already broken the record for most combined tries and assists.
He's silly, man.
He's ridiculous.
Well,
Yep.
the
That brings
last
us
game
through- yeah.
of the men's Six Nations.
That's the last preview of the Men's Six
the
Nations.
last preview. We've done a lot of these.
We've done a lot of these.
And-
Women's Six Nations to come, though.
I must confess, there's a big part of me that really struggles to cheer against France, even without
I know.
Dupont playing.
I know.
Just because they are the most entertaining team.
They're the most fun.
They are the most
I love
fun.
watching them. They're my favourite team to watch.
Okay, right. No explanation needed.
Yeah.
In terms of fun alone, rank the Six Nations from 6 to 1.
Okay.
Just this year.
Is it the same?
Just
I
on
think-
vibes, just on vibes.
I think there's a lot of overlap with the wokeness.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, purely on vibes. France. Can we have 7 Nations have Wales pre and post Gatland?
Sure.
Second is Wales under Sherritt. Third is Italy. Fourth is Ireland. Fifth is England. Sixth is Scotland. Seventh is Wales under Gatland.
Squidge hates Wales. You heard it here first.